This is the 3 a.m. conversation that you really want to be a fly on the wall for. This is the Sleepless Knights podcast, hosted by Mr. Lobo of Cinema Insomnia and my producer Paul Sanders of BESTOW TV. Those who listen know it's unlike all those other podcasts. This one is for us night people. We obsess on pop culture, we talk movies, talk shop, get weird, do interviews, answer your questions. We take you to the airport and to the laundromat. Okay, well, sometimes we get lost, but we promise you that we will go where no podcast has gone before. Dare you put down as little as $1 American and support our next show. We're getting it ready for you now. All you can hear for $1 or more an episode. Please join us on Patreon. Patreon.com/Sleepless Knights Podcast. All one word. SLEEPLESS-KNIGHTS-PODDcast. Only one D in podcast, even though we emphasize the odd in our pODDcast. We want normal people with real jobs to find us. Sleepless Knights Podcast on Patreon.
Attention Sleepless Knights. Thank you for consuming this OSI 74 product broadcast, live from the Black Knight satellite. For optimum performance and safety, your host, Mr. Lobo, asks that you please listen to these instructions carefully. When in a hospital or other healthcare facility, observe the restrictions on the use of electronic devices. Switch off before boarding an aircraft to prevent interference with communications systems. Do not operate this device in the presence of flammable gases or fumes, chemical plants, or where blasting operations are in progress. Always listen hands-free while driving a vehicle. Failure to observe these instructions may lead to immediate termination. It's time now for the show to begin. Thank you. Have a very pleasant evening.
You're not dreaming. You're listening to the Sleepless Knights podcast. I'm your host, Mr. Lobo, and floating in orbit around this island Earth. I don't even know what the planet's called anymore. I don't know what the ape's name for the planet is now. Floating in orbit is Paul Sanders of BESTOW TV, my co-host. He is in his life pod. He's been there for several years now. We're hoping that we can plan a rescue. But, you know, it's kind of outside the budget currently to rescue Paul. So luckily we can still do these podcasts. Paul, are you there?
Yeah, I can't figure something out. You can't send me a rescue vessel, but yet I still got a letter today.
Wow, you got a letter in space in your life pod? That's incredible.
I got more than a letter. I got my chimp bucks today.
Whoa, really? Well, that's great news, Paul. You know, Dixie and I, unfortunately, we're still waiting for our chimp bucks. President Zayas hasn't figured out how to spell his own name so he can sign the rest of the checks that go to everybody else. So it's going to take a while probably before we get ours.
I mean, this thing's kind of weird. I mean, it's oversized.
Yeah.
It's purple. It has Ronald McDonald in the center. And the denomination is exactly 1,200 chip bucks. I mean, how do you break this? I mean, can I get like a $5? Is there 5 chip bunks? Can I get a bunch of those? Or
there are, you know what? There are actually no other denominations. That's the rub. That's the big problem with the chimp bucks. I mean, and it's the only form of currency currently, and it's just exactly $1,200. That's it, $1,200. Every single chimp buck that you see, if you get it out of the McDonald machine, it's just $1,200. So, for example, if you decide to buy a $1 pack of bubble gum, Paul, you better spend it wisely because there's no cash back. So that $1 pack of gum would just cost you $1,200 or 1,200 chimp bucks instead.
Well, that seems like a racket. But you know, I mean, if it's going to cost you $1, then just buy 1,200 packs of gum. Problem solved.
Well, you'd think that, but unfortunately, hoarding of non-essential items is a big problem on Earth right now. So if you buy more than one pack of gum, you could be put on a list and held for high treason, and they'll give you a lobotomy. I mean, I've got a few friends here that actually got that, and like David the Rock Nelson, if you notice, he's got that sort of baseball stitching on his head. But actually, he really doesn't seem that different than before. So, and everyone else who had a lobotomy pretty much seems the way they were before. So maybe this is saying more about my choice of friends in general.
Well, I mean, I guess I can just stuff it in my air quote mattress if I had one, and just save it for a rainy day and just use it when I finally get back to Earth.
Oh no! Chimp bucks expire in 30 days from the date received, Paul. So you're gonna need to use it or lose it.
Well, I mean, really, I can load up on bubblegum, dental floss, expired magazine subscriptions, comic books from the 1990s. I mean, the list goes on and on. I mean, it will keep me entertained till the rescue ship comes, I guess.
Yeah, well, good luck with that. Fortunately, all businesses are closed currently, so really you couldn't spend the chimp bucks even if you wanted to.
Really?
No, I mean, yeah, really.
Well, you know what? I used my last roll of toilet paper up here. I've got some functioning toilet paper then.
Lucky you. Wow. Okay. Well, the chimp bucks are good for something after all. Well, tonight we're going to get into we're going to be wiping things all over the place. We're going to be using our chimp bucks. Alvin and the chimp bucks. We're going to be spending. Yep. Do you know the words to the song, Paul? It's been a while, but we're back in style and blah, 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 blah. We're the Chipmunks. Alvin, Simon, Theodore, Theodus?
Zaius?
Dr. Zaius. We're the Chipmunks. Yes.
Washington, Lincoln, Zaius.
God. Alvin. But no, actually, we've got kind of a story going on. We're kind of, and it's interesting. I mean, do people really care about stories anymore, or is it just canon that they care about? It's like, this thing happened, this thing didn't happen, this character was introduced, this character is introduced. What's this person's origin, or what story goes where? I feel like we're kind of obsessed with how, like, even with this podcast, are we just obsessed with how it fits in the story of the other podcasts, or can we just enjoy this podcast just by itself?
Well, as far as this podcast goes, as Stan Lee once said, everybody's podcast is their first podcast. So we always kind of treat each episode as its own self-contained thing. But as far as everything else, it's like, I guess, like, who's the keeper of the canon? Are the fans or are the studios?
Ooh, well, that's an interesting concept. I mean, because there is kind of a rampant, kind of rabid, and I think it's kind of fed by the internet too, because our consumption of media is so great, and we're so dependent upon it, and we have this ability to recall everything and compare everything. We want to know right away, is this new thing that we're going to consume going to fit in with all the other things that came before it or not, right? So maybe that should be our topic tonight, if we could kind of dive into film canon across all media, and how fans, that maybe our obsession with canon can be a good thing, but it also can be a bad thing, right?
Oh, so that's going to be the topic? I wanted to go back to the chimp bucks thing. I thought we were running the wall. I thought we had some synergy going with that, but I mean, I guess if you want to talk film, I mean, that's what we do. I guess that's our thing we do. That thing that Lobo did do.
That we're not going to talk about the film, That Thing You Do.
That thing you didn't do?
What thing did I do?
I don't know.
Is that a movie?
That thing you do is a movie.
That Thing You Do is a Tom Hanks movie, right?
I think so.
And there are no talking apes in that movie.
I don't think so. And how much canon is involved with that?
That's a good question. Like, do you watch Sleepless in Seattle first? Or no, because it's in the 60s, right? So you'd have to watch That Thing You Do before, maybe Forrest Gump, and then That Thing You Do, and then Sleepless in Seattle.
Now, does the canon only revolve around Tom Hanks? Or is Tom Hanks just a part of an entire universe? So,
What's the center?
Might be another, or The Notebook. Because, The Notebook and You Got Mail, Get it?
Or, yeah, The Notebook and You Got Mail, right? The Man with One Red Shoe, does that fit in? Joe versus the volcano? Or is it not, maybe it's Meg Ryan. Who is at the center of this universe? Maybe Hooch, right? The dog. Hooch is at the center of the Tom Hanks universe.
You said The Man with One Red Shoot?
Shoe.
Shoot?
One red shoe.
I missed that. Was that the sequel?
The Man with One Red Shoot. I think that's the porno version.
That's what happens when you get a dry runs, I guess.
Well, we had the dry runs before the show, so that's not technically in the canon of the podcast yet, Paul.
Okay.
Oh boy. So this is the problem, right? This is the problem we've created for ourselves, right?
Correct.
And so we're going to be talking about this after the break. To canon or not to canon? That is the question on tonight's Sleepless Nights of Insomnia.
Ew, this money is staining my hands.
Now comes the final chapter in the most remarkable science fiction series of our time. Battle for the Planet of the Apes. The final chapter in the incredible Ape Saga, as two civilizations battle for the right to inherit what's left of the Earth. Battle for the Planet of the Apes from 20th Century Fox, rated G.
And we're back with the Sleepless Nights podcast, and the topic of discussion today is canon, and specifically our fascination with canon. And there's an article, it says, "Our fascination with canon is killing the way we value stories." And it's written by James Whitbrook. And this is on the IO9 Gizmodo.com website,
and ironically, this article's got like a whole whopping 286 views and 7 bookmarks. I mean,
oh my God, it's lighting the whole internet on fire.
This guy is like getting the YouTube in way of views.
YouTube numbers,
Yes.
and that is incredible. So obviously we had to talk about this. We had to make it the topic of our entire episode because James is he is threatening 300 views with this thing.
And 20 of those views probably just came from us just refreshing the page to come up with the idea for a podcast.
Right. So he owes us at least this.
And I love that it's classified under rant. So, he's ranting about this and we're ranting about his rant.
We're ranting about his rant. And then probably people will start ranting about our rant, about his rant.
Oh, do you think somebody else is going to make a podcast about our podcast about this guy's article?
Maybe someone could make a YouTube video about our podcast about that guy's article.
Fans need to get on that. We need some arts really quick on this.
And we got to make sure that it's all canon. Everything has to sync up with everything else.
Before you get in the article, here's his.
Yes.
I popped up his profile, and his profile is James Whitbrook. James is a news editor at IO9, and he wants pictures of Spider-Man.
Whoa! So this guy is an editor. So he so he wants to be an editor. So he wrote an article, but he's actually the editor.
He's the editor. He probably has the grayed out temples.
Oh yeah,
and the mustache,
the Hitler mustache,
the big cigar.
Now is he which Spider-Man, which J. Jonah Jameson is he from Spider-Man? Is he the one from Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends? Is he the one from the first Spider-Man movie, the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movie? Is he the one from the comic books?
I mean, this is we're talking canon here, so this is important. James, you need to email us and let us know which J. Jonah Jameson you are. Sorry.
Right.
The lobotomy is just starting to kick in.
You haven't even paid for it yet.
I had one before it was popular.
Yeah. So, I think that, we can't really take this article seriously until we know exactly which J. Jonah Jameson that James Whitbrook thinks he is. And now getting into, which is really what the article's about, where you got a problem where fans are getting super toxic. And not that it's all negative, because I think it's a pretty balanced article, or at least he's just walking in the minefield of not wanting to anger fans. But it is trying to say, okay, canon can be a good thing because, it can be story building, it can be, world building, it could be expands the universe, respects the source material. But on the other side of that, when we're not even paying attention to the characters or the story, and we're just checking off a checklist or an archive of, the knowledge of, okay, well, now we know where this character comes from, or now we know how this fits into this other thing, and we're obsessing so much on details, much in the same way, and this is me interjecting my opinions into this, much in the same way sports fans will obsess on the statistics and not necessarily on how the game is played, or how the game makes them feel. Maybe that's a safer thing, maybe because, we're a little guarded with our emotions, or we feel like that these franchises have so much power over us in our popular imagination, that this is a way to kind of have power over it. Oh, that's not canon, or oh, I hate this because this character wears a red vest and now he's got a blue vest, so I can't take it seriously because I have the knowledge that vest is supposed to be red and not blue. So because I have that knowledge, I am superior to this movie because I have the true knowledge of what this character's about.
This movie sucks because the Joker does not have an origin.
So in this case, you are that guy. Right?
No. Yes.
You are kind of that guy where it's like, okay, this is, and I can be that guy too. And I think that depending on our level of fandom on a particular topic, I think we all can be this guy a little bit, right?
I think,
let me just interject on mine, because you just said the Joker.
Yeah.
Like when Rob Zombie's Halloween, I didn't even go see that movie because when I heard him in an interview talking about the character not just being a shape, but being an abused white trash kid who, goes bad somehow, that I just thought his take on it was so wrong from the John Carpenter version, or from what I feel the original classic Halloween, that his take on it for me was so wrong that I knew I wouldn't enjoy it right off the bat, and I didn't even bother to go see it.
Right. I mean, I'm kind of taking it where the article says about like how the toxic fans are out, they're lashing out onto the other viewers and only they're right and stuff like that. And then going back on what I'm saying about like the Joker and stuff like that, that's not really like I'm not telling everybody, oh, you shouldn't go see Joker, it sucks. I was kind of more in the camp of, I'm not interested in this, I'm just not going to see it.
Mm-hmm.
Versus, I don't think this covers that toxicity level. Like, I wasn't specifically targeting people or yelling at people about it. If people wanted to know, I'd give them my opinion of, oh, this is why I wouldn't see it. But I wasn't telling people not to go see it. If people wanted to see it, they were going to see it. And a $1 billion franchise later, who am I to say? But I was voting with my bucks. I wasn't really, it wasn't the toxicity of it, if that made sense.
No, that makes sense. And I think that there is it's okay to not like something, and it's okay to stick to your guns if you don't agree philosophically on the basis in which a film is created. You certainly don't have to see it, and you certainly don't have to enjoy it. But it is interesting how many people will wholly discount a movie or wholly discount, a franchise or a continuation because it chooses to not follow something that came before it.
Correct. And I guess the other question is who controls the canon? Are the fans in control of the canon? I mean, the way he says about like the toxicity about it is, it sounds like the fans know the true canon, and therefore anything that deviates from that, they're blasphemers.
Right.
Versus, do the companies hold the canon, and the companies dictate what direction everything goes?
Well, it's interesting because what the companies giveth and the companies taketh away, right?
Right.
I think that expanding the canon at one point in time was really important to keep the fires burning in between movies. Like in the case of something like Star Wars, it took 3 years for them to make a Star Wars movie, and people were just waiting around for 3 years. And so if you weren't filling in those gaps with something to keep people interested in the property, then there was the potential that when that next movie came out, there would not be as much interest. So they gave a lot of authors free reign, and I think people want to if they're going to bother to read something that relates to a film like Star Wars, they're going to want to think that it matters. So that when they see that next Star Wars movie, it's at least not going to contradict what they're seeing in the next Star Wars movie. Right.
But then what about the opposite, where it's like, without the fans, that media doesn't exist anyway. So when using this Star Wars analogy, where they have all this expanded universe and say another company takes it over and they just, decide to throw it away.
Right. I mean, you've got I guess that sword burns both ways. I mean, one, you've got the fact that they sold it off to somebody else who can make that decision to throw all that canon away. But then, of course, you've got that actually happening where they're going, okay, well, we don't everything, all those books you read and all that stuff that was supposedly continuing and the expanding universe, none of that matters anymore, because we're gonna pretend like none of that happened, and we're gonna continue from the existing material. But then they're gonna go ahead and pick and choose and either steal things from that canon that they're supposed to be ignoring, or contradict the stuff that's in canon that they're supposed to be building off of.
And there's another interesting point that he has here too, and he talks about spoiler culture, and that if you're just regurgitating something that already has a pre-established continuity, and you go, if you're not following what's already pre-written, well, it's already spoiled. Things, those details already exist. Or if they are trying to hide it and trying to say market towards a general audience, and this toxic community is like, oh well, this happens and this happens and this happens because of the source material.
Right. Yeah. Well, then it's a thing where they're feeling like they have to subvert the audience's expectations somehow, so that there's something to talk about, right? Because people because it's not like, okay, with the example like classic literature, okay, like everybody knows what Frankenstein is about, so you're not spoiling it by telling everybody what happens. But people like that story, and so they want to take that ride. But we kind of live in a culture where it's like, well, I already know where that road goes, so I won't take that road. Or I'll read the Wikipedia about where that road goes so that I can be all caught up for the next road, So then it's not about really enjoying the entertainment of it. It's about just collecting the information. How are we on time, Paul? Are we still in our first segment?
We can roll out here if you'd like, and
I mean, we don't have to.
Or we could just be silent for 30 seconds to a minute.
You know what? I'm gonna take a little drink here. I'm gonna try to calm down, because all this talk about canon is getting me a little worked up. So I'm gonna, everyone at home, grab your favorite beverage and just take a long, smooth sip. Smooth. Yes, indeed.
Now it makes me have to want to hit this Folgers can.
As long as you don't have the dry runs in that Folgers can.
Well, the optimal phrase was "try to hit."
Oh, try to. Oh, good.
You ever try to piss into a Folgers can in zero gravity?
No, but I'm willing to learn. We will be back with, and I don't know why you would be back, but we will still be back, whether you're back or not, with more Sleepless Nights of Insomnia after this.
This is Mr. Lobo, your movie host for Alpha Video. Did you realize that Alpha Video is the leading manufacturer and marketer of budget-priced classic movies and television shows on DVD? We have over 4,000, that's right, 4,000 active titles available on DVD, and we maintain aggressive release schedule, very aggressive. I mean, we're a little mean about it sometimes, maybe pushy. Maybe mean is too strong of a word, maybe a little pushy. But there's so many mamby-pamby distributors out there that aren't aggressive enough in their DVD distribution. We're tilting the balance the other way because we want to make sure that you're getting your DVDs, you're getting your 4,000 DVDs on time every month. So thank you so much for supporting Alpha Video, and check us out at oldies.com.
This is the Sleepless Nights podcast, and here in our meditation chamber, Paul has been giving me some dark secrets of the Dark Empire, talking about the Star Wars universe. Now, the Emperor, they brought back the Emperor in the newer movies after having a different villain altogether for two of the movies.
Hashtag spoilers.
Yeah, sorry, hashtag spoilers. But that was something they didn't intend to do originally. And so I guess you read some of the expanded material.
I'm familiar with
before,
some of the
right? Or familiar?
material.
Yeah. So how did that?
So like we referred in the segment 2 was that there's a lot of source material. Like basically Star Wars didn't have source material to begin with. It all came from the mind of George Lucas. And
right.
How the canon kind of evolved out of that was like, oh, well, there's this plot hole. Let's write a story about this. Or there's that plot hole. Or here's this approved area where we're allowed to talk about where George Lucas doesn't want to go. And they kind of fleshed out their own canon by using the comics, the movies, or not movies, but comics, cartoons, novels, so on and so forth. And people really clung to those ideas. I mean, you get the idea of Mara Jade out of them. You get Grand Admiral Thrawn from those series. And then, like you said, where you have the Emperor and the whole idea. Now, the thing with the Emperor being a clone, that's not expressed in the movie. That's something that is expressed in the novel. So that's Disney's way of reestablishing that continuity. Because when Disney took over, they abolished all that. They got rid of all of it. They threw it right in the trash can and pissed off the fans that were really into all that stuff. Mm-hmm. And said, "Oh, we're going to write it anew." And it kind of in the perspective of a company, it kind of makes sense because they're not really shackled to something that's preconceived. They can kind of go in any direction that they want. Mm-hmm. And then it seems like they go in a new direction that they want. The fans aren't really having at it, so they kind of backtrack and then retread those stories anyway. And they kind of bring back the whole thing with the Emperor. And like I said, the Emperor, the whole thing of him being a clone, it's expressed in the novels that he's been hopping from clone body to clone body because they're deteriorating. Mm-hmm. And that's a thing that's actually from, I believe, Dark Horse, Dark Empire series of books that dealt with the clones. I mean, Timothy Zahn even dealt with the cloning aspects of different like Jedi and Sith and whatnot in their novels. If you've ever read that, I don't think anybody ever has.
The Timothy Zahn novels were rough. I mean, I remember trying to read them, and I know Aaron likes them, but once it got into the lizards that repel the Force or whatever, I just tapped out. I can't remember how old I was or whatever, but I was like, nah, no thanks. I'd rather read the Marvel comics than this.
They were a tough sit, and the thing was that was the first time we got Star Wars stories in 10 years, 20 years? When that came out, like 95, so like 10 years.
Something like that. I can't remember when the Timothy Zahn books came out, but I know that you know we were jonesing for movies, and that's all we got.
We didn't get anything, so this is all we got. So we we immediately latched onto it, and this was the start of something that, according to some, was a good part of the expanded universe. Mm-hmm. And like I said, they redid the Emperor. I mean, it's not the only time that they've done it. They brought back Grand Admiral Thrawn, but tossed him back a couple decades to where he pre-exists before the Empire, whereas in the Timothy Zahn books, he existed post-Empire crash. This one, it's during I believe it's during Clone Wars continuity. It's all part of the Rebels storyline, which I believe Rebels is pre A New Hope. So, and they kind of bring him back, and it's a fan favorite. But then, going back to toxic fandom, where some people prefer the original Zahn and some people like the Rebels version of the Zahn, and which is canon now. So this is the point where it's like, the company is the one that's deciding the canon. The fans are deciding what canon they like, but the companies are kind of regurgitating it. And is it kind of, are they just bastardizing the original source material for their own means?
And then I guess the other question is that okay? I mean, if it is their property and they own it, and at the end of the day it belongs to them, are they a legitimate author to make those decisions? It's difficult because, like I said, in the old days it was George Lucas, and even though a lot of it was an ensemble effort, there was the illusion of he was the auteur, he was the guy who made the decisions. It came from his mind, it's his imagination, and even the worst of them, and a lot of people would consider the prequels the worst of them. At the end of the day, it's his story to tell and his story to F up if he's effing it up, But when it's a situation where, you've got a whole all of these conflicting interests making these decisions, and making these decisions based on profit, I guess, instead of creativity, right?
Based off of executives, lawyers, and test marketing. Isn't that usually how this goes?
Yeah, and executives, lawyers, test marketing. And I think some of it's posturing, and, it's like, okay, well, I'm the new head of this studio and I want to show that my ideas are better than the ideas that were before, or I finally get to make the decisions. I'm tired of telling someone else's story. I'm going to tell my story, or I want to put this kind of thing out there. I want to put my stink on it. Sometimes, though, I feel like, again, even though we were just talking about canon and obeying canon, that's interesting that like they, the Emperor being able to keep himself alive, in a different body, that concept was out there, and then they got rid of that concept and said, okay, we got a new villain. He's named Snoke, and this is what this show's about. And then it's like, okay, no, wait, this character is not working. We got to tie this up. We're going to go back to that idea that the Emperor can be revived and he can have another body, and here it is, right? I mean, is that the...
And Snoke is nothing more than a meat puppet.
Snoke was just another clone or a meat puppet controlled by the Emperor. So, I mean, I guess if you felt like they were going to be going that direction all along, then maybe if it seemed more like a calculated twist versus a bailing out on a character that they couldn't make work, right?
Well, they do have a character named Bail Organa, so I guess they used the bail to bail themselves out, and purchase their way out with chip bucks.
But even though canon is important, like I think about things when I was a kid, or series of films when I was a kid, again, in the old days, and especially pre-Star Wars, the movies that came out, you didn't have VCRs, you didn't have the ability to watch everything back to back to back to back per se. And so the way you thought about those stories was maybe different. I mean, I know that like the James Bond movies, I saw a lot of those with my dad, and I watched a lot of them on TV in the 70s. And, with those movies, they really were really didn't sync up to each other. It's not like you could, if you watched one right after another, one really gave the other more, oh, okay, well, this fills in what happened to this guy. I mean, it was like
if they tied together, that was very, very loosely.
Very loose. It was like Inspector Gadget, where it's almost like they're telling the same story, only in a different locale with a different villain and a different femme fatale. It's sort of like, this is the kind of movie this is, and these are the kinds of elements that we have. We have a cool car, we've got gadgets, we've got a super spy, we've got sexy ladies, we've got a super villain who's got his Uber base somewhere. That all of those things kind of all happen. The James Bond movies, they contain a lot of elements to them that satisfy an audience, and I think that the canon of James Bond wasn't necessarily a canon of story, but maybe a canon of promises from an entertainment standpoint. You know what I mean? These are the kinds of things you can expect when you see this kind of movie. It's more like a genre, I guess, versus a canon that they were following.
Right.
Well,
they had novels, right? Because it's based off of a novel. It's not its own thing. But
that's the weird thing too, is they don't really even follow the novels that closely. From what I understand, the novels are very different than the source material, and in fact, to the point of, I guess there was a copyright loophole in 1983, and you had 2 James Bond movies come out the same year, and I saw both of those in the theater. It was Never Say Never Again and, brace yourselves, Octopussy.
Mm-hmm.
And Octopussy was with Roger Moore, who had been James Bond for over 10 years at that point. And the other movie was done with Sean Connery, who was the first James Bond. So and I guess that's why they call it Never Say Never Again, because I think he said he'd never come back and never be James Bond again. But they brought him back to be in a competing James Bond movie that was a closer interpretation of Thunderball, which was already done as a movie, but apparently this is a more faithful version of Thunderball than Thunderball. And
it was produced by an opposing company where, what was it, MGM, I believe, has all the production rights, and I believe the Sean Connery version came out through Warner Brothers, via this loophole.
Yeah, and I think honestly that it sort of in a weird way kind of, I don't want to say killed the franchise, but it just wasn't the same after that for a long time. Probably not until the Daniel Craig movies. And if someone out there is a James Bond fanatic, can you tell us, like, Timothy Dalton and Pierce Brosnan, I mean, which camp owned those characters? Was the copyright thing still in dispute at that point?
Doing a little bit of research on that specific element, the article expresses that the copyright disaster kind of ruined the James Bond franchise, and they didn't retain copyright back until Daniel Craig. So that puts us up to question: is the article misleading, or is just the Pierce Brosnan and the other guy, Timothy Dalton, are they just something they just did, and just with the Bond name because it was out there and they could do it?
Yeah, and I'm not sure, like, I didn't watch a lot of the Timothy Dalton or the Pierce Brosnan ones. Were they based off of books, or were they all made up titles that just sound like titles of Ian Fleming books? Because I know that the Daniel Craig ones are all Ian Fleming books again, right?
I believe so. Yeah. And they have I mean, truthfully, I've never seen a Bond film, but from my understanding, the Daniel Craig ones are probably the only ones that really have a good continuity, that they're not, loose like the other ones.
Yeah, and they're kind of, they dovetail right into each other, where you can watch them in succession and they all build on each other, which I think is something that perhaps modern audiences demand more, right? I mean, that's what this article's about, is that modern audiences want all the movies to work together.
Right. Everybody wants a universe.
We've got this Godzilla movie coming out, which is Godzilla and King Kong and probably more, right? Usually whenever you've got two characters fighting each other, like if it's Frankenstein meets the Wolfman, Dracula has to be in there,
and
right?
Abbott and Costello.
Abbott and Costello. In Abbott and Costello meets Frankenstein, they're all in there. Wolfman, Invisible Man, everyone you can think of, Dracula. They all throw them in there. So, because that's the only surprise you can give people is by adding another character. Batman versus Superman, right? In Batman versus Superman, what happens in the third act? Wonder Woman shows up.
Wonder Woman.
Right? That's because you're giving away half the plot in the title. So some other character has to come in there. So my prediction right now is that Godzilla and King Kong will be fighting each other, and then another monster will show up, probably Ghidorah, and the two of them will have to team up and fight this third monster. That's if I were to tell you what the plot of King Kong versus Godzilla or Godzilla versus King Kong, that I think would be it. And you've got all these people now, my friends who are kaiju fans, they're watching every single Godzilla movie ever made, starting with the 1954 version. And honestly, every two movies, they practically reboot themselves. I mean, a lot of those movies don't really connect to each other.
Yeah, the only thing that Toho omits to is that Godzilla's only a sequel to the 1954-55 version.
So that's new Godzilla is only a sequel to that, right?
Well, the new Godzilla is probably an exception because the new Godzilla is Americanized. So
I see.
We probably have our own universe, our own canon.
Okay, so it's interesting, but again, it's like, does that discount all these other movies just because it doesn't fit into the latest movie, or vice versa? Does that make this latest movie illegitimate because it doesn't honor every single movie that came before? Anyway, that's something we can talk about when we come back with more Sleepless Nights of Insomnia, the Canon edition.
Mego presents the Planet of the Apes action figures. Dr. Zaius, the orangutan scientist. Cornelius, the archaeologist. Zira, the woman scientist. The soldier ape. And the astronaut. All Planet of the Apes action figures sold separately by Mego.
Right, that's sort of kind of a Godzilla noise.
Oh, that was you. I thought that was my belly.
That was the dry runs again, right?
That was the mixed shits coming.
that was from spending your McDonald's money, right? McDonald's money, yes, McDonald's. So we've got a new Godzilla movie, and the Godzilla movies, as we know, I guess, sort of have a canon because there is a collection of characters that we have come to expect, right? There are certain people on our checklist. Oh, okay, now here's Mothra. All right, okay, that's where Mothra fits in. Where does Ghidorah, or actually, depending on what direction they want to go, Monster X, Monster Zero, King Ghidorah, King Ghidorah. I mean, they're all the same character, right? They have to decide what version they want to do.
Right. And I mean, and everybody gets excited about, the fanboys get excited to see these creatures. But when you refer to this back to the theme of this podcast, where it's about canon, there really isn't any canon. There's no connective tissue. So it's kind of this weird disconnect of how these creatures just kind of appear, and there's not really, like, there is an explanation, but there isn't an explanation to why they're there. And I mean, if we got them all, you might as well, throw in King Caesar and Ultraman and Gamera.
Just we've already partnered with other studios to get King Kong. Why not bring them all? Iron Giant could be in there.
Right. I mean, George, Lizzie, Ralph, and Larry. I mean, we might as well get all the the Rampage characters in.
Rampage monsters.
I mean, the hell with it. Let's dig up Roger Moore and put him in there.
Oh yeah, sure. Roger Moore.
I mean, everybody wants all these creatures except Minion. Nobody wants Minya.
Oh no, Nobody. No, never Godzuki. Hashtag never Godzuki.
Hashtag never Godzuki.
Yeah, well, it is interesting because, it is that thing where fans are, who's going to get introduced in this movie, or, what other movies are they going to canonize or include? Godzilla Final Wars was like a checklist. There were so many things, everything from Atragon to Godzilla versus Megalon to, they
even had the Matthew Broderick Zilla.
They even had the Matthew Broderick Zilla, right? They even had the Matthew Broderick American CG Godzilla in there, So that was, I guess, kind of an early hearkening of that kind of checklist filmmaking where you're just trying to reach out and connect to as many franchises as possible.
Well, even before that, you had Destroy All Monsters too.
Destroy All Monsters, where I guess in that case it was kind of a throwback to the classic Universal, where it's like, okay, we've got Godzilla, we've got Frankenstein, Dracula, and Werewolf. Our version of that is now Godzilla, Mothra, Rodan. We'll have them all in one movie fighting.
You might as well throw in Frankenstein, because didn't Frankenstein fight? He fought Kong, didn't he?
There was a Frankenstein Conquers the World, where Japan has their own sort of monster that they also call Frankenstein, which is just a giant sort of Cro-Magnon dude. So, but yeah, again, it's all weird, right? What's interesting is that those movies have a weird, I guess, again, that's going with a genre. They're connected more by, I suppose, their own style that they've created, their own genre that they've created, and I suppose a collection of characters that they've created. Because now going forward, they're going to try to have this consistent canon where all of these monsters are pre-existing old gods, right? These are monsters from long ago that have all returned now to reclaim the earth. That's the story of King of the Monsters. And going forward, that's going to be the explanation of all of these monsters so that they have a consistent canon going forward. But if you go backwards, they go back, some of them are from outer space, some of them are spirit animals. They just keep changing the rules on those characters. So, I don't know if it really, part of it matters, part of it doesn't matter. It is interesting when a studio or a director will decide to completely ignore all of the movies that come before, where you've got like Halloween, the Halloween movie that just came out last year doesn't connect to any of the other Halloween movies with Michael Myers except the first one.
Right.
But it's not even a numbered movie. It's also called Halloween. So now we've got at least three movies called Halloween.
Halloween and Halloween as well.
Halloween, and Halloween, and none of them really respect each other, or have much to do, or they're all different movies, rather.
Isn't that quite frequent with the Halloween movies? Isn't that kind of like the Godzilla ones where they more so tie back to the first Halloween movie than any of the other sequels?
I guess that is sort of a reoccurring thing. There was a string there where they tried to connect them all with the sort of daughter of Michael Myers sort of thing, or Laurie Strode being the sister, but a lot of that does fall apart, and and even in Halloween 3, where they completely went a different direction and told a different story that didn't have Michael Myers at all, which is funny because they acknowledged that in the 2017 Halloween.
Oh, yeah.
by having someone wearing a silver shamrock mask. So Halloween 3 is in the canon of the new Halloween, even though it doesn't have Michael Myers at all. And the first Halloween is in the canon of the new Halloween. but everything else.
Is there anything establishing his mask to begin with? Could it be that he's just wearing a shamrock mask to begin with?
See, now I thought that would be brilliant. And again, if Halloween 3 were made today, they probably would have felt the desire to connect those two movies more directly to each other, and that would have been the easiest way. Is that Cochran just made the Michael Myers mask also as part of some sort of druid ritual, some sort of blood ritual. Okay, it's time for another bloodletting. We're going to make this mask, and one special child will get this mask and do this witchery for us, right? And that's an interesting precedent of, okay, we're going to make a sequel, but we're going to choose which movies where we lost our way, right? The Superman Returns movie does that, where it's like, okay, Superman 1, yeah, all right, we're following that. Superman 2, yeah, we come after that too. Superman 3, no, that doesn't exist. That never happened. Superman 4, no, can't hear you. I can't, la.
Well, 4, I don't blame him for 4, and 3, more of a vehicle for Richard Pryor.
But
you know what? The thing is that
I thought it was magical. When I was a kid, I was fine. There's nothing wrong with.
I just rewatched that, and it's like that opening is just all like slapstick. Like he's just walking down the street and shit's happening around him, and he's oblivious to what all's happening.
It was brilliant.
But I got to give the one thing was that villain, when she becomes that robot, that scared the living shit out of me as a kid.
Oh yeah, that was for real, man. When she becomes cyborg.
From what I understand, that was originally supposed to be Brainiac, I believe, because Brainiac was supposed to be the villain, and then they decided to go with more of a Lex Luthor kind of plan.
Yeah, I mean, if it were Brainiac, that at least would have given it something versus some guy who was sort of like Lex Luthor light,
right.
Lex Luthor, Diet Lex Luthor.
Yeah, wasn't he? It was the cousin or something like that, or Great Value.
Great Value Lex Luthor. Yeah, that was a bad idea. And then they brought Lex Luthor back for the third one, and then they sort of did a Bizarro type character where they create a Superman with Solar Man. But yeah, the problem with that fourth one is that the budget was too small compared to the others. And I feel like
good old Canon Pictures. R.I.P.
Yeah, R.I.P. But I mean, at least they tried to have a message as far as like they used the Superman brand to try to promote anti-nuke kind of stuff, to promote peace, But anyway, they ignore all those films. For better or for worse, we're not here to say whether they're good or bad at this point. They're just misunderstood. Right. But the point is that they made that movie with was it Brandon Routh?
Yes. Yep.
And then Bryan Singer made Superman Returns and it takes place right after Superman 2. And it did not do financially well, so there were no sequels to that sequel.
And I mean, that's a rough movie and I don't even really think like the comic books ever established that. I don't think that they ever dealt with Superman being a deadbeat dad, which is kind of the main thrust of that movie.
Yeah, I don't know why they went that direction, to be honest.
And Lex Luthor again, where it's like Lex Luthor, there are more villains to Superman than just Lex Luthor. We need to start using other characters too.
Yeah, I really feel like, I guess they want to be taken seriously. I don't understand why you don't want to go Bizarro or Brainiac or Mr. Mxyzptlk. I mean,
this came out, I want to say late 90s, maybe early 2000s. Might be early 2000s because this came after X-Men, and I believe X-Men came in 2001. Because he left. He was supposed to do X-Men 3, and then he left to do Superman. So, I mean, you even have, like, characters to pick from, like, Doomsday at that time.
Right. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. But then, regardless, I guess it didn't work, and then they just started all over, but they kept this guy who was Superman, right?
Right.
So it's a really weird thing where they rebooted the movie. They ignored Superman Returns, which ignored everything except 1 and 2.
Right.
So does that mean they just ignored everything? I guess they just ignored everything.
They just go back and restart the whole franchise.
But they kept the same guy because they figured he wasn't the thing that was wrong with it. I guess, right?
For which one?
Brandon Routh.
For Superman Returns?
For Man of Steel. When they did Man of Steel, they kept the same guy, right?
No, it's Henry Cavill that's in Man of Steel.
Oh, Henry Cavill's Man of Steel? I didn't know that.
Yeah.
So how long has it been Henry Cavill?
It's for that Man of Steel, Batman v Superman, and Justice League at least.
Oh, okay.
I'm sure there may be. I don't think there's any other crossovers in between.
Because I did not see Man of Steel.
You're lucky.
Yeah. and Batman versus Superman, I felt like the best thing about that, it's the thing we were talking about before. You know, it was the third character that shows up in the last act, which was Wonder Woman. Mm-hmm. Wonder Woman stole the show,
which is odd because that's not a movie that doesn't really, is not really, Wonder Woman's not really needed in that thing. That's supposed to be about Batman versus Superman, and you've got something that's so crammed with story, and then the third act you throw in Wonder Woman, and then the surprise big bad.
Yeah,
and wrap it up in 3 seconds.
Mm-hmm. But I mean, I don't like that version of Superman. I know that you were saying in the break that you can't really follow the Christopher Reeve Superman with a modern take, right? That's what you were saying.
Like I was saying over the break, where you almost need to reboot these characters every so many years because the sensibilities change. Whereas you get the Christopher Reeve sensibility, and it's like the late '70s ideal of Superman and how he's dealing with those times, and then you flash forward to the early 2000s, Superman Returns, who technically is supposed to be still that Christopher Reeve's character. And it's kind of a mismatch. It doesn't really fit. And he doesn't really fit with the times because, according to his story, he was away from Earth that entire time. He was searching for Krypton and came back.
Yeah.
So you almost need to, like, after so many years, just reboot it. Superman or Marvel movies or James Bond or anything, because it's like the sensibilities change. Because at least in the comics, they do that. Every so many years, they have to reboot. You have to keep Peter Parker 16 for the most part. I mean, modern Peter Parker is more college age, but
yeah,
I think like the overall ideal for the superhero is that they're eternally 35 years old. Batman, Superman, they're always in that 35-year-old age range. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So they're constantly kind of rebooting it so that they never age, but the things around them do change so that they're speaking to the audience of that time. So, it's kind of one of those things where I wonder if I have my kids watch the original Christopher Reeve Superman, how much of that do they really connect to, and how much of it's just like, I prefer Man of Steel. I prefer Batman versus Superman. I prefer that one because even though those movies are not as superior, my toxicity showing a little bit, even though those aren't really superior versions of the characters, those are the characters that speak to this current generation.
And maybe they only speak to the current generation because they're newer, because I think we've got a generation of people who can't really appreciate things that are older than 5 years old. Mm-hmm. So that's an interesting thing too. My feeling of Superman is a little bit different than yours. I kind of feel like Superman is sort of he was never with the times. He was never current. He was always sort of above us, he was always different than us. He was an alien. His moral code is he's showing us a better person that we can be.
Mm-hmm. And he doesn't have to. He can dominate us.
Yeah, he doesn't have to, but he somehow feels responsible, because with great power comes great responsibility. To coin another franchise, which I think was Caddyshack. I think that came from Caddyshack. But
with great power comes great. No.
But I think that Superman has a I could see them needing to reshoot it because the filmmaking has changed and there's maybe an overall sensibility that's changed. But even the 70s Superman didn't reflect the times in the way that, Superman wasn't wearing a disco shirt and,
unless it was Superman 3.
Well, yeah, but I'm just saying Superman wasn't. Superman even in the 70s version kind of had a 40s aspect to it. It had a 40s sort of. It kind of was a cartoon of the idea of Superman in a sort of postmodern setting, to where it sort of resembles modern day, but it sort of resembles all of our ideas about Superman and what Metropolis like. And the Batman movies kind of have that similar in a similar way, where you've got not really New York, not really, this year or this day, but Gotham City and what Gotham, and what that means across that whole, not necessarily canon, but across the whole mythos of what Batman is, Mm-hmm. So you have, a city that is a cartoon of a city, and a world that's a cartoon of modern life, like Batman the animated series. I mean, you can't really put a year on where that's taking place. That's just taking in Batman world. You know what I mean?
They've got modern weaponry, yet they got blimps.
Yeah, they got dirigibles. Yeah. So, and everyone looks like they're driving a roadster from the 40s, right? But they've got cell phones. Yeah, I mean, all that stuff is cool. And it's a postmodern comic book landscape that is that maybe it's more modern because it's being made in a more modern time, but it's true to the ethics and the message and the idea of what that world means or what those characters mean to people. And I don't know if I feel like, especially with superhero movies, they always try to make them so realistic and modern, where it's like, okay, well, everyone either has to look like a biker or paramilitary. They can't just wear a costume that's a costume, when we have a whole world full of people who just wear costumes. Mm-hmm. So we've got comic book movies now that are trying to get this gritty sort of realism to them, when I don't know if gritty realism is the thing that people read comic books for.
Now, do you feel like the Christopher Reeve Superman or the Tim Burton Batman or anything, do you think that they're anything related to the canon? Do you think that there's any ties besides just in spirit as film franchises? They're just their own entity?
Oh, well, I mean, to be honest, when I grew up with, again, my brush with Batman and Superman in the comics is very similar to where I didn't read Superman in 1939, so there was no internet, so there was no way to follow the canon of 30 years of comic books, so my only canon is I read a few issues growing up, and their canon was already established. Batman was already Batman, and he already had his rogues gallery of villains already activated, so there wasn't a lot of constant telling of origins or seeing the Waynes getting gunned down in an alley every 20 minutes. That's stuff that happens in the movies, but that's not really what I connected to in the comic books. I feel like, I guess for my canon, it's always been an aesthetic. I like what Superman's about. I like that character. And I like what he looks like. And the same thing with Superman is same with Batman. I like what Batman. I like what Batman's about, and I like what he looks like. So, I mean, that's a fairly shallow interpretation.
As long as he looks the part, right?
But comics are visual also. And I think that from my standpoint, I'm maybe more activated on a visual standpoint. So the thing that's going to turn me off faster than the story being wrong is it just not feeling right or looking right.
So now the next question is that, you go and you look back, and we'll start with, like, say, the Joker film that we talked about a little bit at the top of the program and in the last episode. But even back to any of the Jokers in any of the franchise, they're all different from each other. Some may say that they are 25% different.
Yes, that's a good point. And again, if we're going on an aesthetic and you've got the brand name of, okay, this is a Godzilla movie, and people are paying money to see Godzilla. And if they pay to see Godzilla and it doesn't resemble Godzilla, like the Matthew Broderick Godzilla, right? Mm-hmm. They probably paid big money for the name Godzilla, but then Toho said, no, you only bought the name only. We still control this original version of Godzilla, and whatever you do has to be different, has to seem different than what we've got, or we'll sue you. Right.
Mm-hmm. And it has to be that 25% that's been tossed around.
Yes. And I think that even with the Batman movies, when someone leaves a franchise, like Tim Burton leaves a franchise and someone else comes into it, they have to probably, maybe contractually, even though they're trying to continue it, they don't want to have to pay all of Tim Burton's people anymore. Mm-hmm. They want to keep all that money for themselves. And so they're going to change it to a certain degree so that it doesn't resemble the thing that they're continuing for their own purposes. And I think that even with the Star Wars movies, as coming back to the very beginning and going full circle, I think Lucas and 20th Century Fox still retained some of the rights to some of those characters from the original trilogy, which made it necessary for them to downplay or eliminate a lot of those original elements in favor of the elements that they owned and controlled and could make more money about. And in fact, I think we could do a whole podcast just on that, changing it by 25% or changing it by 30% or more, so that you can control, because it's all about money, it's all about control, and screw what the fans want. If we're going to have to bait and switch them because we want them, we don't want to pay all these other people who did all this creative work before. We've got our brother and our friend and our little team of people and our crew that we are making this movie now, and we want to keep all of that pie for ourselves, right?
Correct.
So that being said, Paul, what do you say? You think we're going to wrap this up and maybe come back to this idea the next time?
Yeah, I want to give a quick thanks to James Whitbrook and his article. Hopefully we'll bring you at least 3 more views, and I'll refresh the page once or twice.
Three more. We were promising 3 more views and 7 likes.
All right, 4.
4 likes. I'll like it twice.
Okay. I'll unlike it and then re-like it. Does that
count? We'll try that, hopefully it'll help him out. And thank you for giving us the inspiration. We hope we faithfully followed the canon of your article in our interpretation of what we thought it was about.
And speaking of canon, I want to follow up with our own canon. How many lobotomies do you think you can get in a single lifetime? Do you think I can purchase a second one?
I don't even remember what we're talking about.
Okay.
You have been listening to the Sleepless Knights podcast, or should we say, pODDcast.
pODDcast.
Emphasis on the odd. Our theme is by Mars Homeworld at Deadhouse Music. Our opening announcement is by Ophelia Necro. She does a radio show called Suicide Watch. And you could reach Mr. Lobo at cinemainsomnia.com, or find me on YouTube. YouTube/Mr. Lobo, MISTERLOBO. Mr. Lobo on Facebook, Facebook/MR.LOBO, or on Twitter, at Mr. Lobo, MISTERLOBO.
Or you can find myself, Paul Sanders, or better known as BESTOW TV, at BESTOW.TV, on YouTube /BESTOW TV, on Twitter at BESTOWPROD, PROD, and on Facebook, BESTOW TV.
If you want to place an advertisement with this podcast, and gosh, why wouldn't you? We could be talking about you right now. Contact us, Mr. Lobo at cinemainsomnia.com. That's MRLOBO @CINEMAINSOMNIA.com. Or support us on Patreon. Patreon supporters get to hear this podcast before anyone else and a lot of other great stuff, right, Paul?
Sure.
Doesn't get it better than that, right? So come join the fun at
patreon.com/Sleepless Nights Podcast.
That's
patreon.com/Sleepless Nights Podcast.
Please stay up with us next week for another Sleepless Nights podcast. Or should we say, pODDcast.
Podcast.
The best thing about being an insomniac is never having to say goodnight.
Good night.